This week on the Retirement Quick Tips podcast, I'm talking about longevity risk. Today, I want to explore what it is and whether or not longevity risk is a big risk for you and what you should do about it in retirement. So, longevity risk is simply the risk that you will outlive your retirement savings because you lived too long. Your retirement lasted longer than you expected, that you planned for, and that extra time in retirement dwindled your assets down to nothing. Longevity risk has become especially problematic as people are living well into their 80s and 90s. So your retirement savings potentially need to last 30 years in retirement, even more than that sometimes. I know people who retire before 60, and in that case, longevity risk is a huge risk. So the earlier you want to retire, the more you need to consider longevity risk because people are just living a lot longer than they used to. You compare that to just a few decades ago. In the 1970s, you might only live to age 71 or 73 on average. That was the life expectancy 50 years ago. And it's been creeping up ever since. It's kind of actually topped out now. Between COVID and obesity, it really has topped out. But it's nearly a decade longer life expectancy is. And so most of you listening have somebody in your gene pool who lived well into their 80s. And so we really do need to plan for a 30-year retirement. If you retire at 60, you want to plan to live to 90. And 30 years ago, that was not the case. Most people in retirement, well, they also had pensions back then too. Many more people had pensions. 401ks weren't really a thing back then. You couldn't even have a 401k until the 1970s. But back then, a lot of people had a pension. And on top of that, you really only needed to make your money last maybe 15 or 20 years at the most. So today it's closer to 30 years, but the savings rates that are required to live in a longer retirement haven't filled that gap. Most people don't consider how long they'll need their money to last in retirement. So many Americans are at risk of outliving their savings and then just relying on help from their family, Social Security to get by in retirement. Now, let me be realistic here because most people will not actually end up draining their savings down to nothing. They will adjust their spending as their assets start to dwindle. So I've never had a client personally in my own experience who has actually run out of money. I have a handful of clients where based on their spending and their withdrawal rate, I am concerned about them dwindling their assets down. And so it's really about making sure that you adjusting your spending and your withdrawals and your lifestyle in retirement, especially at the outset. So anyways, we'll come back to that. But longevity risk is such a huge risk. And it's actually one of the biggest worries of my clients that, when someone first comes to me and we're having a conversation about what their goals are and what makes them tick, most people are very concerned about outliving their money. It's one of the most common concerns that people have as they approach retirement, as they contemplate working with a financial advisor for the first time. They're like, I want someone to help me with this because I'm worried that I'm going to outlive this money if I do this on my own. So even for clients that are very secure, millions of dollars in net worth, longevity risk is still a major consideration because many people, regardless of how much in assets you have, will adjust their spending accordingly. And so many people with millions still spend down their assets. And, you hear about this dramatically in tabloid type news stories and shows on TV. It's like they had so much money and they went bankrupt. It's actually quite common because people don't adjust their spending. So we want to avoid that though. We don't want to have to dramatically alter your spending and lifestyle decisions in retirement. Nobody wants to up and move and downsize and do all the things and never travel and just sit around and watch TV all day. Like, that's no fun. We don't want that. So that's why I'm talking about it on the podcast. The longevity risk, even though it's the risk specifically of living too long in retirement, it also encompasses a lot of other risks because inflation is a factor in that. Healthcare costs can really dwindle down your assets. Long-term care costs, especially the ones like yesterday, I talked about unexpected and paying for memory care facility for years longer than you expected. All of those things can also wipe out your savings. And if you only have one source of income, like Social Security, and then, your portfolio withdrawals on top of that, that Social Security is not changing. So usually what ends up happening is you have to withdraw from your investments and you have to withdraw at a much higher rate, or you could even be too conservative with your investment decisions. And that can also exacerbate longevity risk like everything else. That's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Come on back tomorrow. I'm starting to dive into the few key ways and guidance for actually reducing longevity risk. Now that we kind of understand it better, we know what a problem it is. We know how to not bury our head in the sand about it. We need to now transition and talk about what do we actually do about it. All right. My name is Ashley Michike, and this is the Retirement Quick Tips Podcast.